Starting off number 10, no life insurance? This first one is definitely out of this world. Neil Armstrong didn't have life insurance along with the entire Apollo 11 team. That sounds absolutely bonkers, especially considering the fact that he was leaving behind family on Earth, so if something were to happen, which was very likely, there was nothing left for them. And also like, what? But it was because they were doing something that was more dangerous than anything any human had ever done before that they just couldn't afford the life policy. Taking out a life insurance policy was nearly impossible, but the astronauts had something up their sleeve. While in quarantine, the crew signed hundreds of autographs and gave them to their family and friends. Even though eBay wasn't a thing yet, they knew that those autographs would be worth a pretty penny considering how famous the team was. Thankfully, they didn't really need to, but that didn't stop the autographs from being sold. One even got picked up at an auction recently for 30 grand. Number 9, Gordon Cooper. Gordon Cooper. I think the phrase never meet your heroes really applies here, because as we learned in the first part, a lot of early astronauts really let the fame get to their heads. Cooper was happy in his married life, so long as he maintained the happiness of his mistress, who was also a married woman. 4 months before he was chosen to be an astronaut, his wife Trudy had decided that enough was enough. She was tired of his infidelity and decided it was time to leave after 12 years of marriage and put it in the dust. But little did she know, as she walked away, she was taking away his life dream. As we learned in the first list, divorce wasn't a good look. Cooper begged her to come back, not because he regretted his ways, but more so because his dreams of going to space would be cancelled. So it's like, come back, I don't miss you though. Whether it was to help him or because she got 70 grand from a Life magazine segment, Trudy went back. They stayed married until he retired in 1970, when it no longer mattered if he was married, so hopefully Trudy got out of there, you know what I mean? Number 8, hidden treasure. Speaking of Mr. Cooper though, he did make some interesting discoveries up there in the sky that he kept pretty close to his chest. Cooper was apparently very talented at spotting sunken ships in the ocean from up in space. Gordon flew on the Faith 7 flight in 1963 and spotted several anomalies that had the potential of being, I don't know, gold-soaked shipwrecks. When he got home, he put them all on a map, which was a decade-long project. He hunted down and coordinated which ships they could be, but didn't tell anyone until decades later. The discoveries came out in 2017 when a treasure hunter, Daryl Miklos, used the maps Cooper made to make a TV show. There were 100 sites Cooper speculated were shipwrecks, and the first 5 were correct, and he just kept turning up right. Good for you, Cooper. Good for you. Number 7, what's the buzz? Speaking of buzz, remember to head over to Bumblebee if you want to see more of me doing this, because this is what we do over there too, but quirkier. Anyways, enough of that. The Buzz we are talking about is Buzz Aldrin. Now Buzz did some pretty incredible things, but the side of Aldrin NASA doesn't love talking about is, well, yes, the married life. Apparently Buzz wasn't really an emotional guy, so to help his wife cope, he gave her a pet monkey in 1966. They had one before who had recently died, but this one was like nothing like the docile thing they had before. It hated his wife. It would make fun of his wife, bare its teeth, use profane finger language. It was very strange. Eventually, his wife got so upset that she said to her husband, "It's either the monkey or me, someone's leaving," to which Buzz replied dryly, "What are you waiting for?" Ouch. She stayed and put up with the monkey and the primate until 1974. After Buzz came back from space, he took up drinking and had many affairs, so they eventually divorced. Number 6, toilet trouble. Toilet humor can be a little taboo of a comedy topic sometimes, despite the fact that farts will always be funny. But you know a stand-up comedian is digging for comedy and just trying to get a laugh if they're using toilet humor, you know what I mean? Anyone agree with that? But I'm not surprised they don't talk about it that often. I mean, it's not pleasant to imagine anyone doing the number 2, but it's even more so whilst in space, because how does that work? In space, gravity likes to be a little finicky because there isn't any. From taping bags to astronauts' butts to vacuums, right? Helping an astronaut do their duty proved more difficult than they imagined. They made pants astronauts could wear which could hold up to 3.75 cups of urine, and even a 50 grand toilet you had to be strapped into. NASA's Scott Weinstein had to teach the crew to use it and said that it was all about alignment. The hole was a quarter the size of the one that we have in our toilets, and some of them had to use an under the seat camera so they could get perfect perfect aim every single time. Today it's less complicated. They sit on a tiny hole and a vacuum sucks the stuff away. Who would have thought a basic human action would be so hard in space? Number 5. Money, money, money? Take a guess. Right now, watching this video, how much do you think an astronaut gets paid to venture where no human has gone before? Yeah, like take a minute, I'll wait. Long enough. My first guess was like at least like 700 grand or like millions, because you're literally risking your life where no one can save you. Even though most astronauts don't actually end up going to space, but at least the ones that do, right? But the actual number may surprise you. Astronauts are paid by the federal government's general schedule pay scale, and they usually qualify for GS13/14, the highest being 15. This means that they can make anywhere between 100 grand to 161 grand. Hey, to someone like me that's got like 2 to 3 jobs minimum to pay rent, that sounds pretty good. But somehow that doesn't seem quite enough for what they do, or does it? Anyways, by comparison, fish and wildlife administrators are reportedly paid the same. So, I don't know. How do we feel? I guess the main perk is being able to say you made it to space unless you're doing most of the work on the ground. Thoughts? Number 4, the Challenger. The Challenger was one of the most devastating moments in aerospace history. It was literally the worst case scenario that astronauts probably have nightmares about. On January 28th, the world watched in horror as 73 seconds into the launch of the Challenger, it exploded in mid-air, taking with them 7 astronauts, including Christy McAuliffe, the first civilian in space. The reason for the explosion was because of the 2 rubber O-rings, which were designed to seal the sections of the rocket booster, failed. On the morning of the launch, temperatures were unusually low, which put the craft at risk. Engineers warned against launching. Due to media hype and the pressure, they pressed forward, which was the deadliest mistake they could make. NASA tried to ease the public by saying the crew was probably unconscious when it happened, but more research revealed that they were awake and aware. So, needless to say, not something astronauts love talking about. Number 3, Thad Roberts. This next one isn't entirely PG, so like there's a warning for you. But Thad Roberts decided one day that the Mile High Club just wasn't cool enough for him. Thad Roberts always wanted to be the first man on Mars, but he ruined his chances of that for life. I don't know why. Thad stole $20 million worth of lunar rock so he could touch the stars. He, along with accomplices Tiffany Fowler and Shay Soar, used their official IDs to break in and steal the safe the rocks were in. They took it to a motel, broke it open with a chainsaw, and then scattered them on the bed. Tiffany and Thad then joined the 384,000 kilometer club before trying to sell them to an interested buyer. However, their lovemaking contaminated the rock samples, which made them useless to the scientific community. They were eventually caught by the FBI, and Roberts was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Also, he could say he had sex that was out of this world. Next up, number 2, questionable water. This next one isn't technically a secret, but it's definitely something that's a little embarrassing to talk about. We've talked about some crazy survival stories on Bumblebee channel, and one of them included drinking urine to survive. Something a lot of survivalists don't recommend unless absolutely desperate. Essentially, if you consume your own urine, you are consuming the toxin your body tried to get rid of. But NASA has found a pretty neat way to make it fashion. Astronauts in space actually drink their own urine, but that's after the ship has transformed it back into water. They've been drinking their recycled urine since 2009 aboard the ISS, so I guess anytime they are thirsty, they just go to the washroom. The toilet they use, as mentioned above, uses powerful acids to help control fungal and biological growth. They don't recommend doing this without this technology, obviously, just in case that idea popped into your head. Currently though, they are looking at tech that might be able to pull water from the air, but they are still far from that. And last but not least, the Apollo 11 hoax. The moon landing hoax is still alive and well, and true or untrue, astronauts aren't likely to be heard talking about it because it lives in the realm of conspiracy. We have probably talked about it on this channel. If you can find one video about it, post it below. On July 20th, 1969, the first astronauts landed on the moon. It was a race between the US and the Soviet Union to put their flag on some moon cheese, and we beat them. They beat them. I'm Canadian. Right? Forgot. But ever since, conspiracy after conspiracy has sprung. 5% of Americans reportedly still believe that the moon landing was faked. About 16 million people. You would think that NASA would just like put this conspiracy to bed, but the video that showed the landing apparently disappeared. So that's convenient.
Starting off this countdown, we have the animal corpses. Over the years, a number of animals have been sent into space before humans were ever. This was done to study the effects that space would have on a living being. But sadly, a number of these animals and the crafts have never been recovered and to this day are still floating around in space. Apparently, when astronauts are up there, they have seen some of the deceased animals floating in space. Not only is that super depressing, but also makes everything super eerie as well. Like imagine you're up there and all of a sudden you're like, oh, look at the cute dog, never mind. You know what I'm saying? No thanks. Coming in at number 9, we have the close calls. We all know that being an astronaut is extremely dangerous, but I still don't think we all understand just how dangerous their job really is. At any time while they're up in space, they could just get hit with space junk and die just like that. When Chris Hadfield was in space, they were almost hit by a shooting star. He said, and I quote, "If you want to just talk raw fear, to watch a shooting star from the other side of the sky is a humbling thing to see, because it's no longer just a pretty sparkler like a free firework in the sky. Instead, it's this big thing that could destroy your spacecraft at any time and easily kill you." I swear, I would never be able to sleep while up there. I'd be too paranoid the entire time. Moving on at number 8, we have the readjustment. Apparently, astronauts have a really difficult time readjusting when they get back to Earth. Not only are they back to a place where there's gravity, but being in space in the first place really impacts the body. First off, getting used to the gravity apparently makes astronauts feel really sick, and for months they just feel woozy and feel like they're gonna throw up constantly while back on Earth. And also, when you return, it throws off your balance, so it's kind of like learning to walk all over again. Not only that, but it's emotionally draining as well. You have to get used to the noise of crowds and the constant stimulation from everything going on around you. This often overwhelms the astronauts when they return home. And lastly, apparently astronauts can get taller in space. And I mean, if you're on the shorter side, then this is probably a dream for you. But no, apparently it's super painful. You grow in space and then you come back down to Earth and you shrink in size, and it can cause extreme back and leg pain for years. And at number 7, we have the radiation levels. While in space, astronauts are exposed to approximately 50 to 2,000 millisieverts during a 6-month period. Being exposed to 100 millisieverts puts you at a huge risk for developing cancer. Not only that, but they are at a risk for gene mutation, which can affect their future children. I'm telling you, astronauts literally sacrifice their entire lives just to go to space. It is crazy. In our 6th spot today, we have the trained PA. Okay, I certainly never knew about this, and it's quite wild to think about. But when astronauts are in space, they can't tell when their bladders are full. That's because the urine is floating around in the bladder instead of being at the bottom of the bladder. So astronauts aren't able to tell when they have to go pee. They can only ever tell when the bladder is almost full, which obviously can cause bladder and kidney problems. So what astronauts have to do is undergo special bathroom training. They are actually trained to relieve themselves every 2 hours. That's insane when you really think about it. Like, the training they go through is intense. They really have thought about everything. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the germs. This is another thing that we don't really think about when we think of astronauts. But basically, being in a spaceship is a really germy environment. Think about it. When a person sneezes on Earth, the snot particles shoot about 3 to 6 feet, and then gravity just knocks it down, you know? But in space, there's no gravity. So if an astronaut sneezes or coughs, their particles are lingering in the air for their companions to breathe in and enjoy. First off, gross. Second, this allows sickness to spread very quickly on board, which is a huge hazard. And at number 4 today, we have the flesh falling off. Yes, it's as horrific as it sounds. Basically, after a month in space, an astronaut will lose chunks of flesh off of their feet. All the calluses on the bottom of their feet will fall off. On the plus side, their feet will be as smooth as a newborn baby. The negative side, the chunks of flesh will float freely throughout the cabin. In fact, when astronauts take off their clothes, they have to make sure that they do it near a vent so that it can suck in all the dead skin cells. Or else, you'll be minding your own business and then all of a sudden, a chunk of somebody else's foot is just gonna be like floating by your face. Not pleasant if you ask me. Moving on to number 3, we have the smell of space. Apparently, space has a really nasty smell. So if you got a sensitive nose like me, maybe rethink your career choice. People have described the smell as hot metal or welding fumes. Others say it smells sulfurous. The worst description is that it smells like sweaty feet and stale body odor mixed with nail polish and gasoline. No thanks. And it's not like a faint smell. No, it's as if you just stuck your nose right into that bag of mixed unpleasant odors. That smells very unpleasant. Imagine smelling that for hours. That alone would make you feel nauseous. In our second spot today, we have the weakening bones. When in space, astronauts actually have to exercise twice as much. That alone is torture. But if they don't, they run the risk of weakening their muscles and bones. Because on Earth, we are constantly working our muscles by pushing back on gravity. In space, that doesn't apply. A study of 13 International Space Station astronauts found that their bone strength dropped 14%. That's about the same bone strength as an elderly woman with osteoporosis. That happened within about 6 months in space. That's terrifying. They literally are putting their bodies through hell. And some astronauts, when they return to Earth, have to deal with skinny leg syndrome, which is basically their legs look super skinny because in space there was no gravity to help the blood move down to their legs. They have to suffer with this for months until it returns back to semi-normal. And in our number 1 spot, we have the aliens. Because I can't talk about space without talking about aliens. Now, it may just be that when Neil Armstrong took his walk on the moon, he became the first person to do so, and also the first person to see aliens. So according to NASA, when Armstrong landed on the moon, they lost transmission with Neil for roughly 2 minutes. During those 2 minutes, Armstrong apparently sent this back to NASA, and I quote, "These babies were huge, sir, enormous. Oh God, you wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are spacecrafts out there, lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon, watching us." That last part, they're on the moon, watching us? That's terrifying. So apparently NASA never received the signal, but it got sent to other radio hams. On top of that, Maurice Chatelain, former chief of NASA communications, confirmed that Armstrong did indeed report seeing 2 UFOs. But of course, if you bring this up to NASA, they will deny all claims, and they apparently lost all original recordings, which sounds hella suspicious. Like, how do you just misplace these recordings? Okay, NASA, okay.
Alright, coming in at number 10, we have space snakes. Dr. Musgrave is a trustworthy man, or at least his credentials suggest he must be. Not only is he a NASA astronaut, he has 6 degrees, and he's a doctor and a mathematician. He has made 6 space flights, and he believes that there is life out there. In 1994, he said, "On 2 of my missions, and I still don't have an answer, I have seen a snake out there." What? It's not just a wee little space snake either. He said that it was 6, 7 or 8 feet long. He said that the snake followed him around for a long period of time and he tried to communicate with it. Space snakes, honestly. Dr. Musgrave thinks that they must have their own propulsion technique, which honestly is just baffling and is a can of worms or snakes. Coming in at number 9, we have asteroids. Astronaut Chris Hadfield conducted a Reddit AMA and he discussed something that scared him. He said, "Sometimes we hear pings as tiny rocks hit our spaceship, and also the creaks and snaps of expanding metal as we go in and out of sunlight. The solar panels are filled with tiny holes from micrometeorites." Honestly, that really terrifies me as a person who's like a bit scared of flying in an aeroplane. This would deeply stress me out. He also said, "I watched a large meteorite burn up between me and Australia, and to think of that hypersonic dumb lump of rock randomly hurtling into us instead sent a shiver up my back." Like, I'll say Chris, mate, Jesus. Coming into number 8, we have the Formation. Gordon Cooper, the last American to spend time in space alone, has had a couple of very strange experiences in the skies. The first happened when he was a member of the Air Force. He was flying with other pilots in 1951 when he saw, I quote, "a vast armada of UFOs flying in formation at extremely high altitudes." I'm sorry, but vast armada, that is terrifying, not just one curious UFO, a whole fleet. On top of that, in 1963, Cooper was shot into space aboard a Mercury capsule to circumnavigate the world. As he was passing Perth, he noticed a fast-flying green object that was also picked up by Australian tracking systems. Now, the press were briefed that they were not allowed to talk to him about this. Why? Like, seriously, why? Coming into number 7, we have the check mark. American astronaut Leroy Chiao was the commander of the International Space Station in 2005. During his time up there, he saw some extremely weird things. He explained his encounter to the Huffington Post by saying, "I saw some lights that seemed to be in a line and it was almost like an upside down check mark, and I saw them fly by and I thought it was awfully strange." Could this have been the formation that Cooper was talking about? Some skeptics even tried to pass the lights off as far off fishing boat lights from Earth, but to be honest, I'm skeptical of those skeptics. Coming in at number 6, we have magnificent desolation. What is it like on the moon? Utterly terrifying according to Buzz Aldrin. Buzz, as we know, was the second man on the moon. Yes, televised recordings of the moon can be seen, and yes, we have high-res photographs, but truly knowing what it feels like to be up there is something only a handful of people can talk to us about. In a Reddit AMA, Buzz Aldrin describes his experience. He said, "My first words of my impression of being on the surface of the moon that just came to my mind are magnificent desolation." He continued by saying, "There is no place on Earth as desolate as what I was viewing in those first few moments on the lunar surface. Beyond me, I could see the moon curving away, no atmosphere, black sky, cold, colder than anyone could experience on Earth when the sun is up." While that sounds totally incredible, it also sounds like the beginnings of a total existential breakdown. Coming into number 5, we have the spheres. In 1981, following the Saljut mission, the USSR cosmonaut Major General Vladimir Kolyvanok gave a press conference in which he shared some very interesting information. He said that he looked out of a porthole and saw something he simply couldn't explain, something impossible to the laws of physics. He described the object he saw as spherical and elliptical, saying that it exploded into a beautiful golden light. After that, he saw 2 more spheres and a white smoke sphere cloud. Then, as they flew through the Terminator, the name for the zone between light and day, he lost sight of them. Honestly, how fascinating and terrifying at the very same time. To me, it's also weird and interesting how Russia appears to be more forthcoming in discussing things that they've seen in space, whereas the United States are keen to keep a lid on it. Why do you think the United States are so heavily guarded on what they'll say about what they've seen in space? Honestly, I don't know. Coming into number 4, we have the knocking. In 2003, Yang Liwei was the first Chinese astronaut to be propelled into space. Now, I understand the loneliness of space might send you a little bit mad, but he said one night that he heard a strange and continuous knocking. He said, and I quote, "Someone was knocking on the body of the spaceship just as knocking an iron bucket with a wooden hammer. It neither came from outside nor inside the spaceship." I'm sorry, but honestly, what? Isn't that some of the creepiest space descriptions that you've ever heard? It seems he wasn't the last to hear it either. 2 further astronauts heard the same space knocks when they went up there. What are these? Coming into number 3, we have the music. Listening to the transcript of the words said on board Apollo 10 is bone-chilling. The spaceship passed by the dark side of the moon, and as it did, the astronauts heard a very weird ethereal music. This is what was said between Eugene Cernan, Thomas Stafford, and John Young. "That music sounds out of spacey, doesn't it? Do you hear that whistling sound?" "Yes." "Boy, that sure is weird music. We're gonna have to find out about that. Nobody will believe us." Later, Cernan said, "That eerie music is what's bothering me. You know what? I hear it too. Who is going to believe it? Nobody. Shall we tell them about it?" I don't know, I think we ought to think about it some. It seems that the Apollo 11 crew heard it too. What was it? We don't really know. Coming into number 2, we have heat is rising in the capsule. So this is really sad and really disturbing, so do skip forward if you aren't ready for something truly terrifying. In 1967, Russian cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov did not make it back to Earth alive, something he suspected would happen when he agreed to be the solo pilot of the Soyuz 1. His spacecraft malfunctioned and he was quite aware he was going to die. Some of the last things he said can't be translated into words. He was screaming and crying words of anger. Among the last words that can be deciphered are, "The heat is rising in the capsule," and "You've killed me." Honestly, that makes me so sad. Finally, coming into number 1, we have "They're watching us." Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon, had something very scary to say when he arrived at the moon in the Apollo 11 mission. It was something he spoke about once but never spoke about again. In a secret transmission to NASA, according to the retired chief of communications system Maurice Chatelain, the first man on the moon's first words were actually, "Oh God, you won't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out here lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon watching us." Now this wasn't heard by the world as the broadcast was dropped for 2 minutes. Armstrong never spoke about it again, although a lot of credible sources have confirmed that this is what he said.